Welcome to the briefing of the Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security on Iran. I hope you are reading some of our publications. I just want to mention some that should catch your attention. Yagil Henkin on the surge of nationalism, the era of Corona. Uzi Rubin's talk on the conference of the presidents in Jerusalem on missile threat. And we published also, I think, an important piece on the methodology of dealing with a crisis by General Ireland. And now we'll move to our briefing by Dr. Colonel Eran Lerman. He was the Deputy Director of Foreign Policy and International Affairs at the National Security Council in Israel's Prime Minister office. He served as number 2 there. He held senior posts in the IDF military intelligence for over 20 years. As you know already, he's a full colonel. And he also served for 8 years as director of the American Jewish Community Office in Israel. Nowadays, he teaches in the Middle East Studies program at the Shalem College in Jerusalem and postgraduate programs at Tel Aviv University and National Defense College. He is proud of being a third-generation Sabra and holds a PhD from London School of Economics and a mid-career MPA from Harvard University. And his most important title, as far as I'm concerned, is Vice President of the Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security. Eran, it's your floor. And I believe David will mute everybody now until the Q&A section.
Okay, fine. What can I say? You know, they say about full colonels, it has yet to be established what are they full of. But let's focus on the matter at hand. This is a serious passage that we're going through. And I think it is an indication of just how serious it is that it's still uppermost in the minds of people in Washington, in Jerusalem, and of course in Tehran, at the midst of this global crisis that has engulfed the world and our countries. And nevertheless, it is of the highest importance, and whether or not you're impressed with President Trump's choice of words or by all the kind of bravado talk that you hear from Tehran, even if you discount this and that, it's still a dangerous passage that we're going through. And I wanted to walk you through the fundamental reasons which make it dangerous, the present crisis in Iran, which makes it even more acute, and the manner in which the Iranians are trying to manipulate their way out of their predicament, which makes it, as I said, a very volatile and quite explosive situation that we're now facing in the Persian Gulf. So first of all, we need sometimes to remind ourselves of the fundamentals, because there were some good souls in America, and not only in America, and here and there, even in Israel, who tried to tell us that Iran, at the end of the day, will make normal decisions as a normal country, and it is led by people who come from the reformist side. And anyway, why should we worry? Because look at North Korea, it's not a pleasant thing. The guy is maybe dying, we don't know, crisis, no crisis, but we manage somehow with a nuclear North Korea. So very quickly, all of these are very misleading propositions. First of all, Iran does not act as a normal state following the logic of what the French called raison d'etat, the realist considerations of a normal state. It is a revolutionary project. It's a revolutionary project that has failed its people, failed to deliver a better life for the Iranians. In more than 40 years in power, since Khomeini came from Paris, the level of economic misery has kept on rising. If you compare Iran's economic performance over these years to that of their neighbors in Turkey, for example, you see just how terrible the revolution has been, which makes it all the more vicious because for them, remaining in the business of destroying Israel, remaining in the business of destabilizing the region, and remaining in the business of acquiring a strategic posture through military nuclear capability are the only justifying elements left, so that can explain to the Iranian people, to the Iranian leadership itself, why are they still in this revolutionary business? So it is a revolution. It's not a normal state. And it is not led by Rouhani, or for that matter, by his smiling Scottish accented sidekick, Mr. Zarif. It is run by Ali Khamenei, unelected supreme leader, who's full of fundamental hate towards America and towards Israel, and for whom this revolutionary project will not be fulfilled until they have basically laid the foundation for destruction of Israel and the elimination of the Zionist project. So we need to keep bearing in mind that on all important matters, the nuclear project, subversion, intelligence gathering, military affairs, foreign affairs, the person ultimately calling the shots is Ali Khamenei, the Supreme Leader, and supported and backed by the IRGC, the Revolutionary Guards, the Pasdaran, the dreaded Pasdaran who control Iran and control the Iranian economy. The third point, which sometimes you come across is, well, think of North Korea. No, North Korea is a different proposition for 4 good reasons, which I'll go through very quickly. 2 good reasons to worry much more about Iran, and 2 good reasons to think that, unlike North Korea, Iran can be dealt with effectively. The reasons why Iran is more dangerous is, first, that if it does get the bomb, then unlike what happened with North Korea, this time the dam of nuclear proliferation will break. The cross crack in the dam will bring the dam down. Somehow North Korea did not force South Korea or Japan or others in the region to go nuclear, because they still trust, some wonder if it's still viable, but the people, they still trust the United States to be there for them against China, and so also against North Korea. In the case of Iran, once they go for a nuclear military capability, so will Saudi Arabia, which may well have a bomb in the basement from Pakistan. So will Turkey. Egypt will not be far behind, and perhaps others. We've seen in other Arab countries as well some potential for nuclear programs. So the dam will break, and everything that's been done since the Cuban Missile Crisis and since the NPT went into effect 50 years ago will go down the drain. Moreover, Iran, unlike North Korea, has allies, adherents, agents, clients all over the region. North Korea is totally isolated. Iran has control of Lebanon. It is with Russia together, the puppet master in Syria. It is deeply involved in Iraq, and it is behind the Houthi uprising, which is in control of much of Yemen. And that's not the end of the list. So armed with a bomb, with a nuclear torch, they could set fire to the region in ways that North Korea can never do. And on the other side of the same discussion, bear in mind, in North Korea, sanctions, I mean, these people, frankly, have been eating their children, and forgive me, but I don't mean this as a metaphor, in the 90s because of starvation. So sanctions may not be very relevant to that kind of Stalinist destructive regime. But the Iranian people have been fed by their government on the basis of their oil income and their economic capacities. They are a trading people. They know how the world is run. They know about how their cousins in Los Angeles live, and they want to live a better life. And so pressure may come to be effective if it is seriously and consistently applied. And at the end of the day, this needs to be supported and can be supported by a military option. In Korea, there's no military option. The South Koreans would never allow the US or anyone else to act against the North Korean nuclear project because they fear for the conventional attack that the North could launch all the way to Seoul in a couple of days. But this is not the case with Iran. We know if there's conflict with Iran, there will be Hezbollah and Hamas and certainly Palestinian Islamic Jihad rockets falling on our population center. We've been through this before. It's a prospect that none of us would relish, but it's a prospect that we are willing to face if this will come to be the only way to stop the Iranians from having the bomb. And it's important to keep this in the background in their minds as well. Because the Iranian government can come to their people and say, look, we're going to suffer a lot of deprivations, but at the end of the day, we will have the bomb and then we will prevail. But if you tell them you're going to go through all the pain and difficulties of very severe sanctions, and at the end, nobody will allow you to have the bomb anyway, because we do have the military option to prevent this from happening, then perhaps you'd better come to the table now and negotiate away this option. This combination may not work, but it is at least our one shot at getting them to desist. And otherwise, we would have to prevent them by force. And that's an option we must maintain. Now, the possibility of effective pressure on Iran has greatly increased within the last few months. The corona crisis, first of all, brought quite a number of cases and of toll in lives, which is probably much higher than the thousands that the Iranians report. I wouldn't take their numbers as Holy Writ. They're probably much higher. And they've made every mistake in the book because China is their ally, they neglected to block flights from China until it was too late. And because of their religiously based regime, they were late in preventing gatherings at the holy places in the city of Qom, with catastrophic results. Even among their own leadership, there have been a serious loss of life. So it's not just the death and the suffering. It's also the loss of faith, literally, the loss of confidence of many people in Iran in their government and its capacity to make sound judgments in the face of the crisis. Add to this that for the better part of a year now, Iran has been under very severe sanctions. Once the US not only left the JCPOA 2 years ago, but a year ago, put an end to the last waivers given to countries that were still buying oil from Iran, the Iranians were essentially driven out of the oil market. And now, in addition to all of this, they have no prospect of returning to the oil market because there is no oil market. I've seen the numbers from the Oklahoma reserves the other day, and where people were willing to pay money for people to take their oil away from them. So oil was selling at a negative price, which means that the market has been wiped out and the Iranians are at zero. Zero is, this zero means that they 80 to 90% of their national foreign currency income and 50% of the Iranian budget have been wiped out. So they are in very dire straits. How are they trying to get out of this? And this is my point in terms of policy. Our government, American government, the international community are facing a three-pronged, complex effort by Iran to wriggle out of this predicament using three very different but interconnected strategies. One is to try and persuade the world that they are in a miserable situation, they need help, you need to lift the sanctions, and then they may be actually willing to come to the table and renegotiate something which at the end of the day, of course, they will refuse to accept. But right now, they are manipulating the option of renegotiation in order to, first of all, lay the condition, put forward the condition of lifting the sanctions. Now, I'm not saying that you should do nothing about the suffering of the Iranian people. We don't need to see piles of people dying from corona in Iran. Help in kind, whatever it means, ventilators, swabs, whatever, medication, I think has been offered, graciously offered, even by the US government, and rejected by the supreme leader, because what he wants is the money that he can use for this and many other purposes, and in all likelihood will also go into supporting their subversive regional activities and other dangerous aspects of Iranian policy. So these manipulations need to be resisted. I know that there are good, kind-hearted people in America, in Congress and elsewhere, who think that there should be some response to these pleas from the Iranian leadership. But I think a line should be drawn very clearly between support in kind for the Iranian people and any action which actually empowers the Iranian regime to continue and resist the pressure to reverse course on their nuclear program. The second set of things that are happening are the provocations that Iran has been launching across the region, and more recently, directly and specifically against the US military presence, naval presence in the Gulf. And you have to recognize the Iranians are running into some difficulties. The war in Yemen has come to some kind of a halt because of the virus. In Lebanon, a lot of Lebanese are angry and frustrated at the way in which Hezbollah has brought ruin upon a proud country in the service of Iranian interests. And in Iraq, there's an open struggle for power, and there's quite a lot of protest against Iran and Iran's proxies. And the new Prime Minister, Kadhimi, was not the most anti-Iranian man on the list. They've managed to trip up the previous candidate, Zofi, who was seriously committed to driving them out of Baghdad. But he is not a friend of Iran. He is the former head of Iraqi intelligence, and the Iranians are finding it difficult to manipulate Iraq to their will. But all of this does not lead them to desist. What it has led them to do is to make it ever more dangerous for the US presence to remain in the Gulf. And so President Trump said what he did on about shooting, or unfortunately he said shooting down the boats. But the response of General Hossein Salami of the IRGC was even more ignorant, because he spoke with bravado about attacking the American Navy, trying to forget, I think, that in 1989, when the Iranians attacked ships that the United States reflagged in order to continue the supply of oil in the Gulf, Kuwaitis and others, the response was the complete destruction overnight of the Iranian Navy. And the capabilities of the US military, I should think, have become much more robust in the last 30 years in this respect. And so the Iranians are playing with fire. and it should be very clear to them, should be made very clear to them that they're playing this far. And finally, and this is what may bring us to the point of crisis in the not too distant future. In response to all of this, the Iranians have also peeled off layer by layer their commitments under the JCPOA. They latch on to the argument that Trump made them do it, forced them to do it. But basically, they are just putting the schedule up. They're pushing the schedule up by a few years. They would have done it anyway, but in 2025. Instead, they're doing it now. But what it means is that they are steadily enriching more and more uranium, first to non-military levels, but then the skip and hop to 20%, and from 20% to 94%, which is military grade, gets shorter and shorter. And they are bringing into the process more and more sophisticated centrifuges. And all of this means that possibly within this year, maybe not deep into 2021, we may need to make very, very serious decisions. And it is to be hoped, that's all I can say, that we will have a full, sober realization of that danger in Washington and in Brussels as well as in Israel. But if we have to act alone, we shall act alone. We do not intend to let our children and grandchildren grow up in the shadow not only of the coronavirus and so on, but also in the shadow of an Iranian regime committed to our destruction in possession of nuclear weapons. So this is what is at stake, and this is what makes the current confrontations in the Gulf so important. And this is also why it is very important to bring this back into focus in the internal political debate, public policy debate in the United States and elsewhere, as we at the JISS are doing in the context of Israeli decision makers and the Israeli public opinion. So at this point, let's open this for questions.
If you have any question, please raise your hand. Yaniv.
Thank you very much. I'm curious, we always hear about the arenas of Iranian influence being in Yemen and in the Gulf and in Lebanon, but I'm curious what the Israeli policymakers think about Iranian designs on Jordan, what our coordination is with the Hashemite kingdom about keeping the Iranians out, how worried are we that the Iranians might get a foothold, and what fallout might there be between the coordination we have with the Jordanians after we annex Yehuda and Shomron?
Well, first of all, the point is not about annexation of the whole of Yehuda and Shomron, Judea Samaria. It's about the Jordan Valley. I tend to think that Jordanians always wanted us to stay in the Jordan Valley as a let's say, as a cordon sanitaire between them and the Palestinians whom they do not trust. But beyond that, the Jordanians are acutely aware that Ali Khamenei, in a very famous or infamous tweet back in November 14, said after the major round in Gaza that Israel should be destroyed, and the way to do it is to turn the West Bank, the Yehuda Shomron, into another Gaza. And what that means is basically that they need access, and access can only come through Jordan. So the destabilization of Jordan is an Iranian strategic interest, goal, if you wish. Now, in order to do this, they need to establish their presence in southern Syria and use southern Syria as a, if you wish, a jumping board, a point from which to pressure the Jordanians. This is why it was so important that Jordan, the United States, and Russia, the other co-sponsor of Assad's regime, came to an understanding back in November 17. And I will carefully say that this was not only a tripartite agreement. Israel was very close to the surface, but of course was not a signatory of that understanding, to keep Iranian influence out of southern Syria. And we have a deep understanding between us and the Jordanians on this matter. The situation in southern Syria is quite specific because there's a strong Druze element, loyal to Assad, but also fiercely independent area. And I think that right now the situation in southern Syria is under control. It is not constituting an active threat of destabilization in Jordan. The Jordanians have handled very well the influx of almost 1 million Syrian refugees into their country. So we think it is under control, but we keep our eyes wide open. And of course, we have a very intimate, long-running dialogue with the Hashemite kingdom on security of their realm and our realm, and the less we elaborate about this debate.
Sharon or Larry, you wanted to have a question?
Yes, just let us unmute. Okay, can you hear me, Eran?
Yes, I do.
A short question, which I invite a long answer. You said that the current Israeli leadership will challenge further nuclear development in Iran. The current Israeli leadership has been a question mark rather than a fact during this unstable electoral process. Can you comment on how time sensitive the challenge is and whether there is sufficient governmental positions in place to deal with this and make a decision that reflects national consensus?
Well, first of all, as you know, we at the Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security have advocated very clearly, unambiguously, for what we call a national cohesion. Leave aside the national unity has become a technical term as to what party sits with whom. But we need national cohesion, we need national coherence, and we hope that now with a fairly broad-based government, which extends into the traditional center and even center-left with the Labour Party, there will be the necessary base for very firm decisions on national security. The team will include the experienced leadership of the Prime Minister, but also 2 former chiefs of staff of the IDF who know the score. And I believe that in close dialogue with the United States administration and with others in the region with whom we established a fairly intimate dialogue by way of our intelligence agencies, etc. I think we can look to a new government once it hopefully keeps together to make the necessary decisions in the relevant time frame, which, as I said, may be any time from the late part of this year and extending into next year. This is what we're looking at, unless the Iranians change direction.
Yes, a question from 8243715. 1209. Yes, we hear you.
This is Rafael Ben-Arroyo.
Okay, hi.
My question is now with the benefit of some
Introduce yourself.
This is Rafael Ben-Arroyo.
Shalom, Rafael.
I did. Hi, how are you? Again, with the benefit of the hindsight, how did the elimination of Soleimani affect Iran's strategy and tactics, particularly with the regional proxies?
Well, the strategy of decapitation, of taking out the top echelon, is always debatable. We've had cases in which we failed. When we decapitated the leader of Hezbollah, we ended up with Hassan Nasrallah, a much more talented individual, taunting us for years. But we also had cases, for example, the Western Front operation of Fatah that never recovered from the loss of Abu Jihad, and Hezbollah's foreign operations never recovered from the elimination of Ahmad Morneh. If I'm to make an interim judgment on the cost to the Iranians of the loss of Soleimani, I would say that in two respects, this operation proved itself to have been the right thing at the right moment. First of all, yes, it has disrupted the relationships and the effectiveness of Iranian control over the proxies, including in Iraq itself. And it was followed by further pressure on some of the leading organizations, the pro-Iranian organizations in Iraq. It also definitely created a certain degree of deterrence. Iranians set up and realized that if they thought they could get away with provocations such as the attack on the Saudi oil facilities and on shipping in the Gulf and escalating actions in Iraq and threatening the US embassy and so on, there actually was a price. It was long in coming, but it came. And I think that deterrence is an important element in the equation now. So in retrospect, I think the Trump administration did the right thing and did it at the right moment.
David.
Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, yes.
Okay, thank you. You mentioned that last week Trump changed the terms of engagement in the Gulf. Have we heard anything back from Iran since then?
Well, we've heard blather, bravado. They're going to go after the US Navy if it ever dares to do this and that. But in terms of action, I think there's been a decrease in provocations. So there may be a distinct difference between the music and the libretto on this particular opera.
Okay. Well, it certainly was a major, it was an important stand to take, and he took it. And I would imagine it will make a difference.
Well, as I said, the Iranians pretend not to remember, but I do think they do remember how the war with Iraq came to an end with a sense of loss and grief, because Khomeini was in his last days, he said, to accept UN Security Council resolution, I think that was 508, and end the war, for me, is like drinking from a poison chalice. But he ended the war because the US moved in on it with very severe consequences for the Iranians. There was also the unfortunate shooting of an Iranian airliner by mistake. But there was also the complete destruction of Iranian naval forces in the Gulf. And the US still has the capacity to do that again on a moment's notice. It's sheer folly for the Iranians to imagine that once the order is given, they can handle the US Navy, which is the best and by far the most powerful Navy on earth.
Brian, please.
Similar to the previous question, but a little different. I'm curious to know your thoughts. And it seems like throughout 2022, Benny Gantz will be prime minister, and how that will change the equation versus Prime Minister Netanyahu. Thank you.
Quite frankly, Israeli politics over the last 18 months have been essentially about Netanyahu's personality, his legal problems, certain nuances about the rule of law and the possession of an activist court, which somehow relate also to his legal problems, and almost not at all about high policy. because at the end of the day, on the key questions, conflict management with the Palestinians, the Trump deal of the century, quote unquote, on Iran, on Eastern Mediterranean economic and strategic integration, on our relations with key Arab countries, basically there's no daylight between Gantz, Ashkenazi, and for that matter, Ya'alon and Lapid, who are out there because they dislike the deal with Netanyahu, but not because they disagree with his policy. Had there been a different coalition situation, people on the more right-wing edge would have perhaps made it more difficult for Netanyahu, for example, to work within the Trump template. But given where we are headed, I don't see a difference in policy on any of the major issues.
Any question?
I have a question.
Go ahead.
Mary.
Mary. Let's take Mary.
Thank you, Efraim. Iran is clearly trying to provoke the United States into some response with its actions in the region. What advice would you give our president, I'm calling you from the United States, as to how to respond with what level of proportionality, and speak freely, because there's no chance he's going to take your advice or anybody else's?
No, I don't speak freely for one reason. I don't think it's the business of an Israeli to give advice that may put American men and women in harm's way. This is for Americans to make that call. But I'm not comfortable just saying things like that without a moment's thought. We need to be very, very honest with ourselves. If action is taken, it should be taken because this is in the interest of America, not in the interest of Israel. We will take care of our own needs. We will put our lives and the lives of our fighting men and women and our civilian population in danger if the need arises. But I think the interests of the United States, to the best of my understanding, requires not only effective deterrence vis-a-vis Iranian provocations, but also basically a clear communication to the leadership in Tehran that the strategy of basically driving the US out, so there will be no threat to their design for breaking through to the bomb, that would ultimately put very important, vital interest of the United States and even the safety of American citizens in danger in the long run. And therefore, the need for very firm, effective action may arise. But such action may indeed be avoided if you build a robust deterrent posture. And in the case of Iran, to do so would require reversing certain impressions that have emerged in Tehran in previous years. And therefore, I think this is why I think that what happened to Qasem Soleimani was extremely important, and a very clear message about the continuation of provocations, whether they are on Iraqi soil or in the Gulf, is an important message to deliver, because these people have a warped view of the world, but they do understand the calculus of power.
Sharon, you wanted to ask something before.
I'd like to know how the Jerusalem Institute for Strategic Studies is interacting with governmental decision makers at this time and in the coming time. We know that each individual has an enormously powerful record of advising people in power and being part of the power structure. But how is the Jerusalem Institute working to deal with the decisions that will be ultimately made about confronting Iran?
Well, we are
Iran, not Iran.
Oh, wait. One wrong letter and my name is Mud. No, honestly, of course, Israeli decision makers have been completely consumed in recent weeks and months by the political situation. Now that we shall see, I hope, a government stabilize, I think practically each and every one of the key players knows us by first name, knows our product, will have people around him reading our written advice. And I'm sure that we, in the past, we've been able also to set up discussions with ministers. I should think that given what I know at this stage about the makeup of the committee, the Knesset committee on foreign policy and security, Vadat HaChutz VaBitachon, I believe that we have people there to whom we will have easy access. And so both in writing and one-on-one, I think we can make a difference. These people will listen to us.
We actually prepared last year for the new government who never came about, a book with recommendations, and we definitely plan to renew our advocacy. Even then, we had access, so we gave a briefing to the National Security Council and to ministers, as Eran mentioned, because of the personalities involved with Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security, we have access to those politicians. Sharon?
Me? Okay. The additional question is this for Eran, and thank you, Ephraim. It's so heartening to know how the Institute is being used as a group project. What is it seems as though this virus is being projected to have a severe effect for quite a period of time. This is not a 3-month thing. This may be a 1.5 or 2-year thing. What is the length of this crisis going to do in terms of the timetable of confronting Iran on nuclear issues? And how much do we think that time will weaken Iran as long as they have the virus, or is the big bang against Iran because of the Chinese air flights?
Well, I would assess at this point that it's no longer just the virus that determines what was about to happen, but rather the almost incomprehensible collapse of the oil markets. I don't know what effect this will have on some Israeli interests, like exporting gas from the Eastern Mediterranean, but the Iranians are essentially being wiped out as an economy. This is an oil-dependent economy. For years, they have kept the restive lower classes in Islam Shah, in the southern suburbs, the arc of southern suburbs of Tehran, more or less happy, or at least quiet, through an extensive system of subsidies. Once these subsidies no longer work, once the regime is essentially bankrupt, then the consequences could become very severe, very fast. And I think, as I said, not only the virus, but only this element will be there. For Israel, I would say this very carefully. We need, and this is our calling at JISS, we need to make our own sober assessments about the effectiveness of Israeli policy on the coronavirus. And this is why it was so important that we had papers from, among others, from Generals Amidro and Island. But we also need to bear in mind that our priorities should stay focused. And And our national reserves, which are, by the way, quite formidable. The Bank of Israel was ridiculed for buying all these dollars, but by now we are sitting on a nice pile of sovereign funds, approaching 150 billion, which is a significant, and we have a nice, so far, still a nice debt to product ratio, much better than the United States for that matter. So we need to bear in mind that while resources would have to be put into the recovery cycle, we also need to maintain the capacity to surge very fast in defense expenditure if and when the crisis is upon us. And all of this is also very important.
Yes, Phil.
Well, okay, you did.
I am interested to hear the views on where Russia fits into this whole story.
A very interesting question, because the Russians have been the free riders. They don't want Iran to have the bomb, but they want the US to break its neck over that, rather, while they, enjoy the bonfire and work with the Iranians to save that bastard Assad from the gallows. But down the road, there are growing differences between Russia and Iran. For example, Syria. Syria is very important to the Russians. It is the one place where they demonstrated some muscle. We need to remind ourselves from time to time, with all due respect to their meddling in American politics and this and that, Russia is locked, is a bear, but is an old bear with bad teeth. And it's locked between China, which has 10 times their population, and NATO, which has 25 times the product. The gross national product of the NATO aggregate is 25 times the size of the Russian product. You don't gain world ascendancy based on an economy the size of South Korea, which is the Russian economy. So Syria for them was a very important little demonstration point. So to lose Syria, because the Iranians would drag them Assad into a confrontation with Israel that would be destructive for the regime, is something that the Russians are very keen to avoid. And by the way, when they see Assad beginning to do all kinds of stupid things, he gets a nice elbow in his ribs, as he did from the Russians in the last few weeks about his corruption and all the people around him who are rotten. All of this is true, but the Russians never spoke about it. Now they mention to him, look, you want our help, you play by our rules. So Israel is keeping the pressure on Assad and speaks to the Russians about it. And we tell them, look, you have a client, you don't want us to break his neck, so do make sure that it doesn't give the Iranians the free run of his country against us, and, as Yaniv has mentioned earlier, against Jordan. So this is the game we're playing with Putin. This is why we need open channels with this guy. Like him or not like him, we need him to act as a counterbalance to Iran's attempts to turn Syria into an Iranian playground.
David?
Yes, with the implosion of Iran, do you think Iran is more likely to go apocalyptic or to go to the table?
Well, I would try to plan for both, because you can never tell with these people. Ali Khamenei will go down fighting, I think. He will try to push his country in an apocalyptic direction. Whether the Iranian people will follow him into the abyss is an open question. We have seen him in the past, and I have to say something. The Obama administration sold the shop with all that's in it in the 2015 JCPOA. But before that, let's say in his first 4 years, Obama actually got a grip on the Iranians with the sanctions, which was quite effective and did bring Khamenei to the table. The only problem is they wasted they had the Iranians literally over a barrel, and then they wasted this advantage with a very, very poor management of the negotiation. And I can make that argument in detail. So I would give credit, not that it's relevant anymore, but I would give credit to the management of the sanctions regime in the first part, or the first Obama administration under a different foreign, Secretary of State. And then I do not give credit to his second Secretary of State because he wasted what the US had as in terms of its grip on Iran. So we've learned that the sanctions can drive them to the table if they are applied consistently, effectively, over time, without all of a sudden going mushy because, of the suffering of the Iranian people. So much depends on that you need to be very, very firm at this point in time.
Rebecca Citron, it's a man. He's a man. We don't hear you. David, unmute Citron.
I enjoyed your presentation very much. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you.
I enjoyed your presentation very much. My question is this: in the possibility that Trump is not reelected and people like Sanders and Elizabeth Warren who believe they have to punish Israel are in office, will they send a lifeline to Iran as Obama might have done in his administration by throwing a rope at him when they had him over the barrel? Will they save him and believe that they possibly can negotiate with him? Is that a concern?
Well, if Sanders and Warren were to set policy, for sure. If they will gain an ascendancy over Biden's foreign policy, if he is the elected president, then again, we would be in a very delicate situation. This is why we need to retain the capacity for independent action. The next American administration, whether it's Trump, who would be more sympathetic to our considerations, or another administration who may not be quite as sympathetic, must understand that the choice they're facing is not between helping the Iranians somehow and stabilizing the situation and going and doing soft stuff, and the present situation. Their choice is between the American pressure and Israeli action, because we would not, it needs to be very, very clear that we would not acquiesce in the Iranians getting the bomb. And if we need to act alone, we shall act alone. And it is not that long ago that the, as I said, Obama administration in its first years, when it was still playing a very different game, asked us to make that point to others, like the Chinese, that Israel would act unless the Iranians are stopped. This is what persuaded the Chinese to vote for the sanctions at the UN. We need to be there, not because anyone asks us, but because it is in our interest to make it very clear to any future American administration: you play with our security, we'll act out on our own. And this is why we need to be very, very firm at this also in terms of our own capabilities.
Any additional question? If not, I want to thank you all for joining the JISS briefing, and I wish you good health from Jerusalem.
And all of you that we may be able to see in person, I wish we could do that soon.
Thank you.
We're here in Israel.
Thank you soon.
We know.
Thank you.
That's still not easy.
Thank you, everybody. That was very worthwhile.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Excellent job.
Thank you.
Thank you. God bless.
Stay safe and healthy.
Thank you, David. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Marvin.